I want you to visualize something with me right now. Just picture a massive old school brass weighing scale.
Like the kind with the two heavy trays hanging from chains.
Exactly. The really heavy, dramatic kind. So imagine on the left tray, just gleaming with this undeniable academic authority, is the number 23.
Okay, 23.
Right. And that number represents Japan's global ranking for overall human development. It's a badge of honor. I mean, it represents immense wealth, incredible health, near universal education.
The absolute hallmark of a, highly developed global superpower.
Exactly. But then I want you to look over at the right tray, and sinking heavily, like just pulling the entire scale completely out of balance, is the number 98.
Oof. That is a steep drop.
Right. That number is Japan's global rank for gender development.
The visual of that scale tipping so violently, I mean, that is exactly why this data set is so compelling.
It really is.
You have a society that has, by almost every traditional measure, entirely conquered the fundamental survival challenges of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Yet simultaneously, it's anchored by this deeply unresolved structural divide. It's a paradox hiding in plain sight.
A 75-place gap. I mean, we are talking about a 75-place free fall between how a country develops its human population overall and how it develops its men versus its women.
It's massive.
And that disconnect is the entire mission of our deep dive today. We're pulling our insights from the Japan and Global Human Development Report, specifically looking at data from 1990 all the way to 2023.
Right, the newest data.
Yeah, because our goal is to look way beyond that surface-level narrative. I mean, we all know the prevailing image of Japan, right? It's wealthy, highly efficient, people live longer than almost anyone else.
So the bullet trains, the neon lights, the longevity.
Exactly. But we want to unpack the structural pain points embedded in the data, because to really understand a country, you have to look under the hood.
And doing that, well, it requires us to change our relationship with statistics.
Huh.
Too often, numbers like national averages are treated as the end of the conversation.
Right, like, oh, the average is high, so everything is great.
It's exactly. But a national average is just a cover page. The real story isn't just about what a society achieves, but who actually gets to enjoy those achievements.
Who gets left behind?
Right. And crucially for the 21st century, at what cost to the Earth those achievements are actually realized.
Oh, absolutely. So if you've ever wondered what a modern superpower looks like when you strip away the pop culture exports and look purely at the raw mechanics of human well-being, you are in the right place.
We are getting into the weeds today.
We really are. So to understand that massive 75-place gap we just visualized, we first have to understand the ruler we're using to measure it.
The methodology.
Right. The report doesn't just use one metric. It uses 4 distinct lenses, I guess you could call them, to view a country's progress.
4 very different ways of parsing the data.
Exactly. But before we get into the complex ones that, adjust for inequality or planetary pressure, let's just start with the baseline, the HDI or the Human Development Index.
So the HDI is really the foundational metric of this entire report. It strips away all the noise and looks at 3 proxy measures for human freedom.
Which are health, education, and living standards, right?
Exactly. It's basically asking, are you living a long and healthy life? Do you have access to knowledge? And do you have a decent standard of living?
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the whole world through that HDI lens first, tracking from 1990 to 2023.
The big picture.
Right. And the data here is genuinely optimistic. Global HDI has grown by 24.3% since 1990.
Which is a huge leap.
It is. Back then, the global average value was 0.60. By 2023, it climbed to 0.756.
Going from 0.60 to 0.756 in just 3 decades, I mean, that represents billions of people crossing the threshold from mere survival to actual development.
It's incredible when you think about the human lives behind those decimals.
It really is. It means massive global expansions in access to clean water, foundational schooling, basic medical care. But, that upward trajectory was not uninterrupted.
No, it definitely wasn't.
The data shows a profound historical anomaly. Between 2020 and 2021, the COVID-19 pandemic caused the first ever consecutive 2-year decline in global HDI in the history of the index.
Wow, the first ever.
Yeah. Since they started tracking it, it had never dropped 2 years in a row.
And the numbers on that drop are just staggering. I was reading this and, well, global life expectancy dropped from 72.8 years in 2019 down to 71.2 years by 2021.
A very sharp contraction.
I was trying to comprehend the sheer scale of that. Losing over a year and a half of global life expectancy in just 24 months, that is a massive demographic shock.
It's completely unprecedented in the modern era.
Right. It's not just a statistic. I mean, it's an entire generation of grandparents lost, millions of careers derailed, global healthcare systems just pushed past their breaking points.
It is brutal. But, and this is important, the resilience of the global system is also highly visible in the data.
The bounce back.
Exactly. By 2023, the global HDI rebounded, pushing back up to record highs to hit that 0.756 mark. The global engine essentially restarted.
Okay, so we have this steep, dramatic global climb, a sharp pandemic dip, and a strong recovery. Now, let's contrast that with Japan's specific trajectory.
This is where the shape of the graph changes completely.
Totally. In 1990, Japan was already starting at a highly privileged baseline of 0.853. Over the next 33 years, they climbed to 0.925.
Which is an elite score.
It is, but when you look at the visual representation in the report, Japan's curve is incredibly flat compared to the global average.
Right.
The report actually uses this specific phrase to describe Japan. It says they have entered a mature plateau.
And the concept of a mature plateau is essential when analyzing highly developed economies.
Break that down for us. What does that actually look like?
Well, when a country is in the early stages of human development, the gains are rapid and highly visible.
Because you're starting from scratch.
Exactly. If you build the first wave of basic hospitals in a region or implement universal primary education, your country's HDI score skyrockets. The interventions are broad and the returns are massive.
That makes sense. The low-hanging fruit.
Right. But once a country reaches the level Japan was at in 1990, where they already possess excellent schools, world-class hospitals, highly functional infrastructure, squeezing out the next decimal point of growth becomes an incredibly complex, slow-moving endeavor.
I was thinking about this plateau, and it reminds me of a video game skill tree.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, when you start in your game, it is incredibly easy to level up your character from level 1 to level 10. You complete a few basic tasks, defeat a couple of early bosses, and suddenly you are significantly stronger.
Right. The progression is fast and obvious.
Exactly. But getting your character from level 98 to level 99...
Oh, that takes forever.
Exactly. It takes a monumental, almost unreasonable amount of grinding for a tiny, fractional increase in power. Japan is essentially grinding at level 98.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But I find myself questioning the metric itself. I mean, if they are at a mature plateau, are we simply measuring the easiest things to track? Have they just maxed out the HDI ruler?
It is a vital distinction to make, honestly, because the HDI is not a measure of a utopian society.
Right.
It primarily measures longevity, basic knowledge acquisition, and raw economic output. It is completely blind to happiness, social cohesion, mental health, or community vitality.
So a society could be deeply lonely or highly stressed and still score a 0.925.
Absolutely. However, we cannot let the limitations of the metric or the flatness of the curve diminish the objective reality of the achievement.
Sure.
Remaining roughly 22% above the global average, which is where Japan's 0.925 sits, compared to the global 0.756, is an incredibly elite status.
It's still a massive win.
Yes. To understand why it's so difficult for them to push that number higher, we have to look specifically at what components of human development they have already conquered.
Let's do exactly that. Let's decode Japan's level 99 baseline. We're looking at those three pillars: health, education, and wealth.
Starting with health.
Right. The numbers here, frankly, look like science fiction compared to large parts of the world. Japan is the undisputed world longevity champion.
The life expectancy data is phenomenal.
It is.
Yeah.
As of 2023, Japan's overall life expectancy at birth is 84.7 years. That leads the global average of 73.4 by a full 11.3 years.
An 11-year gap.
Yeah. But the gender breakdown is where it gets truly wild. For Japanese women, the life expectancy is 87.7 years compared to 81.6 for Japanese men.
And, the compounding effect of an 11.3-year advantage over the global average, it fundamentally rewrites the social contract.
In what way?
Well, it's not just an extra decade tacked onto the end of a life. It changes the entire architecture of how a society operates.
I see.
When a massive portion of the population routinely lives into their late 80s or 90s, the flow of generational wealth slows down. the burden on the healthcare and pension systems becomes a central political issue.
Oh, absolutely. The demographics shift entirely.
Family structures shift too. You have a society where 3, sometimes 4 generations are coexisting for decades.
Right, think about what it means to be born in a zip code that mathematically grants you a bonus decade of life. It alters your entire timeline.
Your career is longer.
Exactly. Your career can be longer, your retirement is longer, your relationship with your children changes. It's a staggering victory for public health, diet, and social stability.
And they pair that incredibly long life with an incredibly deep system of education.
Let's look at the education data, because the report tracks 2 metrics for schooling, right? EYS and MYS.
Right. EYS is expected years of schooling for a child just entering the system, and MYS is the mean years of schooling for the adult population.
Got it. So for Japan in 2023, the expected years of schooling is 15.5 years. But the number that really caught my attention was the MYS. The average adult in Japan has reached 12.7 years of schooling.
And the mean years of schooling is really the true indicator of a society's current intellectual capital.
Because it reflects what the adults have actually completed.
Precisely. Achieving an MYS of 12.7 means that, on average, the entire adult population has completed high school and possesses at least some post-secondary education or formal vocational training.
That is a highly educated public.
It is, especially when you place that against the global average MYS of 8.6 years.
Which translates roughly to, what, a middle school level of education globally?
Roughly, yes. So you see the profound structural advantage Japan holds. When citizens live longer and spend a full third of their early lives in formal education, they create a deeply entrenched, knowledge-based economy.
A workforce that just has a higher baseline of technical skill.
Exactly. This high baseline creates a workforce that is highly adaptable and remarkably resilient to certain types of economic volatility.
Which naturally leads us to the wealth aspect, the final pillar of this baseline HDI.
The standard of living.
Right. The gross national income, or GNI, per capita for Japan is $47,775. And that is calculated in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars, so it adjusts for the local cost of living.
We're comparing apples to apples globally.
Exactly. To put that $47,775 in perspective, that is 2.35 times higher than the global average of $20,327.
Massive wealth generation.
It is. Now, looking at the timeline, there is a very distinct V-shaped dip around 2020. Japan's GNI dropped from roughly $46,900 in 2019 down to $45,300 in 2020.
The pandemic's economic freeze.
Right. But they rebounded back up over $47,700 by 2023. So we have a population that has the wealth, they have the deep education, and they have the long lives to actually enjoy those things.
On paper, it looks flawless.
It really does. But here is the friction point. Having a wealthy, highly educated, and incredibly long-lived population on average doesn't mean that wealth is shared perfectly.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And this is precisely why we cannot rely solely on the standard HDI.
Because it hides things.
Exactly. Averages paint a beautiful, homogenized picture of a nation. They smooth over the cracks, the crevices, the systemic failures where inequality hides.
Right. Like a high average can be generated by a small group of billionaires just as easily as it can be generated by a robust middle class.
Precisely. To see the actual distribution of this progress, we have to pull out the second lens used in the report, the IHDI.
The Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index.
Right. This metric actively penalizes a country's score based on how unequally its health, education, and income are distributed among its citizens.
Okay, so this brings us to what I call the equality paradox. Let's start with the global picture.
It's quite sobering globally.
It really is. Globally, when you apply this inequality penalty, it destroys 22.0% of all human development progress worldwide. The global HDI plummets from 0.756 down to 0.590.
That is a brutal adjustment.
And I really want to emphasize what a drop from 0.756 to 0.590 means in the real world. That isn't just a decimal shift on a spreadsheet.
No, it translates to real human suffering.
Right. That drop represents hundreds of millions of people who are mathematically excluded from the wealth, health, and education of their own economies. It is the statistical representation of systemic poverty existing alongside massive wealth.
But then you look at Japan.
Exactly. When you apply that exact same inequality penalty to Japan, the loss is only 8.6%. Their score drops from 0.925 to 0.845.
An 8.6% loss compared to a 22.0% global loss. I mean, that is a masterclass in the equitable distribution of basic societal functions.
It shows that their baseline services really do reach everyone.
It is a direct reflection of Japan's universal healthcare system and its highly standardized public education system.
The data really backs that up. If we look at the specific penalties, inequality in life expectancy only causes a 2.5% loss to their score.
Which is incredibly low.
And inequality in education causes just a 5.7% loss.
Right. What this tells us is that whether you are born in the rural, snowy north of Hokkaido or in the hyper-urban center of Tokyo, your baseline access to a long life and a highly competent school is virtually guaranteed.
The state has fundamentally mastered the equitable distribution of survival.
Survival and baseline development, yes.
Okay, so the survival and the schooling are locked in. But there's a massive glaring catch in this data.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah. We just established that the overall loss to inequality in Japan was 8.6%. But when you break that 8.6% down into its parts, a disproportionately huge chunk comes purely from income inequality.
Right.
The data shows that income inequality specifically contributes a 17.1% loss factor to that equation. It is the one pillar of their society that is deeply structurally unbalanced.
And to figure out exactly why income is so wildly unbalanced in a country where everyone is, as we said, highly educated, we have to bring back that massive brass scale from the introduction.
The 23 versus the 98.
Exactly. This is where the paradox fully reveals itself. When we isolate the development of women versus men, we bring out the third lens, the Gender Development Index, or GDI.
And when we do that, the illusion of a perfectly egalitarian society just shatters.
It really does.
Let's look at the actual numbers here, because they are staggering. Japan's GDI value is 0.970.
Now, for context, on this index, a score of 1.0 would mean absolute mathematical parity between men and women.
So 0.970 might not sound terrible at first glance.
Not out of context, no.
But you have to rank it globally against other nations. Japan sits at 98th in the world on the Gender Development Index, 98th.
It's a shocking ranking for a G7 nation.
Exactly. Remember, their overall human development rank is 23. This is that 75-place gap we visualized.
Right.
And the smoking gun for this incredible drop is hidden right in the income data. According to the 2023 data, the estimated gross national income for a Japanese male is $59,059.
Okay.
The estimated gross national income for a Japanese female is $37,070.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a glaring 37% gap in economic power.
This data forces us to ask a very difficult question. How does a society with such aggressively equitable education produce such wildly disparate economic outcomes?
Because they're both getting the same schooling.
Exactly. Both men and women are receiving those 12.7 mean years of schooling, but the answer lies in the structural, often invisible barriers within the labor market and, deeply ingrained societal expectations.
What does the report say about those barriers?
The report points out that women in Japan are frequently tracked into non-regular, part-time, or contract employment.
Which usually means lower pay, fewer benefits.
Exactly. And this tracking becomes particularly aggressive after women have children.
The maternal wall kind of thing.
Right. So you have a society generating immense intellectual capital in its female population, but it completely fails to translate that intellectual capital into equitable financial capital.
It's a massive leak in their economic engine.
It is. This 37% income gap isn't merely a gender issue. It is the primary engine driving the overall income inequality that damages Japan's national PHDI score.
It's as if the education system is preparing everyone for the exact same race, but the moment they enter the labor market, half the runners are diverted onto an obstacle course.
That's a very accurate way to frame it.
And it gets even more stark when you look at the political void. The report uses another gender metric, right? The GII.
Yes, the Gender Inequality Index, which measures empowerment and barriers, particularly in reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
Right. And Japan ranks 22nd overall on this GII index, which sounds decent, but when you look under the hood at the female share of parliament seats, it is abysmal.
The political representation is very low.
In 2023, women held only 15.7% of parliamentary seats in Japan. The global average is 26.5%.
So they are lagging significantly behind the global average in political empowerment.
Right. So Japanese women are making 37% less money, and they have significantly less of a voice in the halls of power, where the laws governing the economy, labor rights, and taxation are actually made.
To fully grasp the sheer duality of the female experience in Japan, we have to contrast that lack of political and economic power with their health outcomes.
Because the health outcomes are amazing.
Exactly. We noted earlier that Japanese women are the longest living demographic on Earth. But look at the maternal mortality ratio.
That's the number of mothers who die per 100,000 live births.
Right. The global average is a tragic 216. In Japan, it is 4.3.
Wow. From 216 down to 4.
Yes. Japan is mathematically one of the safest places on planet Earth to give birth. The medical and social systems protect female biological life beautifully.
That's incredible.
It is. Yet, when we look at the labor force participation rate, only 54.8% of women are in the workforce, compared to 71.4% of men.
I've been trying to wrap my head around this extreme duality. Ultimate physical safety paired with severe economic limitation.
It's a very specific kind of development.
It feels like Japan built a state-of-the-art high-speed bullet train. The engineering is flawless, the tracks are perfectly smooth, and absolutely everyone, men and women, is allowed to board this train.
And crucial to that analogy, the train is incredibly safe.
Exactly.
Nobody is falling off the passenger cars.
Yeah.
That represents the maternal mortality rate of 4.3 and the life expectancy of 87.7 years.
Yeah.
The state guarantees your safety on the ride.
Exactly. But once you are safely on the train, the reality of the journey shifts entirely based on gender.
Right.
The men are handed the keys to drive the locomotive, and the men are overwhelmingly the ones holding the tickets for the first-class cabins.
While the women remain in the passenger cars.
Right. The women are kept perfectly safe in the passenger cars, but they aren't steering the direction of the society, and they aren't reaping the highest economic rewards of the journey.
It's a structural bottleneck.
How does a society reconcile having the most educated, longest-living women in the entire world, but systematically keeping them out of the boardroom and the parliament?
The bullet train is the perfect way to look at it because it perfectly illustrates the difference between what we might call protective development and empowering development.
Protective versus empowering. Okay, tell me more about that.
Japan has absolutely mastered protective development. They ensure women survive, thrive physically, and acquire deep knowledge.
The HDI fundamentals.
Right. But they have severely lagged in empowering development, allowing women to dictate the course of their own economic and political lives.
The agency part of the equation.
Exactly. The cultural inertia required to maintain that bullet train seating arrangement is immense. And from a purely economic standpoint, it represents a massive loss of human potential.
Because you're benching half your best players.
Precisely. If you fully integrated those highly educated women into leadership and high-wage roles, the economic stagnation and labor shortages Japan has faced over the last few decades could look entirely different.
It is a profound structural imbalance, and the craziest part is that it is entirely hidden if you only look at that shiny overall HDI rank of 23.
Which is why we dig into the sub-indexes.
Exactly. But so far, we have only been looking at the internal human cost of this development model. There's another hidden ledger here.
The environmental costs.
Right. You can't run a bullet train of this magnitude, powering a massive industrial economy without burning an immense amount of fuel. Let's look at what this plateau of human development is actually costing the planet.
This is a crucial pivot.
We are bringing out our fourth and final lens, the PHDI, or Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
And, the introduction of the PHDI a few years ago was quite revolutionary in the world of global statistics.
Really? Why is that?
Because for decades, the international community basically rewarded countries for building massive factories, burning fossil fuels, and consuming vast amounts of raw materials.
Because doing so drove up gross national income and improved living standards.
Exactly. The original HDI essentially rewarded consumption. The PHDI finally introduces an ecological penalty.
So it docks points for polluting.
Yes. It adjusts a country's HDI score downward based on their per capita carbon emissions and their material footprint.
I was looking at how this penalty reshapes the map, and the numbers shift dramatically.
The global averages change quite a bit.
They do. Globally, when you apply this ecological penalty, the world's HDI shrinks by 10.1%. We drop from 0.756 to 0.680.
A 10% tax on global development, essentially.
Right. But Japan, because it is such a highly developed, heavily industrialized nation, it gets hit much harder.
The penalty is steeper for high-income nations.
Japan's HDI shrinks by 15.1%, dropping from 0.925 down to 0.785.
That's a significant downgrade.
Let's look at the actual eco-burden driving that massive penalty. Japan's per capita CO2 emissions are 8.0 tons.
And for comparison, the global average.
The global average is 4.5 tons, so they are emitting nearly double the global average per person.
Wow, double.
And their material footprint, which measures the sheer weight of raw materials extracted to meet final consumption demands, is 17.9 tons per person.
Okay, and the global average for that?
The global average is 12.7 tons.
Those are heavy absolute numbers. and they reflect the inescapable reality of a high-consumption, resource-dependent island nation.
Right, they have to import and process so much just to maintain the baseline.
Exactly. Maintaining a level 99 infrastructure requires a constant, massive influx of energy and materials. However, if we look closely at the historical timeline in the data, there is a tangible shift occurring.
The positive shift.
Yes. Japan is not simply ignoring the planetary pressure. For instance, their carbon emissions actually peaked around 2013 at 10.3 tons per capita.
Okay, so they were even higher.
Right, but by 2023, they managed to drive that down to 8.0 tons.
Oh, wow. That is a significant reduction.
It's over 2 tons of carbon per person reduced in a single decade. It shows that the transition toward cleaner energy grids and greater industrial efficiency is genuinely underway.
I saw that downward trend, but honestly, there was another stat in the PHDI section that completely threw me off.
The rankings shift.
Yes. I was looking at the data, seeing that Japan emits nearly double the global average of carbon and takes a huge 15.1% penalty to their HDI score. Naturally, I assumed their global ranking would plummet when adjusted for the environment.
Right, you'd expect them to fall way down the list.
But it doesn't. In fact, it's a ranking miracle. When you switch from the standard HDI rankings to the PHDI rankings, Japan actually jumps up 7 places.
Which seems impossible given the emissions.
Exactly. They go from 23rd in the world to 14th in the world. How on earth does a country with a massive carbon footprint get rewarded in an index specifically designed to measure planetary pressure?
It seems entirely counterintuitive until you understand the difference between relative and absolute metrics.
Okay, explain that to me.
The reason Japan jumps up 7 places in the rankings isn't because they don't pollute. It's because almost every other country in that ultra-wealthy, very high human development tier pollutes significantly worse.
Oh, wow.
Right? The PHDI, while penalizing total emissions, is heavily influenced by the efficiency of those emissions.
Efficiency of emissions, what does that mean in practice?
Compared to other top-tier nations, particularly in North America or parts of Western Europe, Japan is incredibly efficient at converting its resource consumption into actual human development.
So they get more bang for their carbon buck, so to speak.
Exactly. Yes, they use 8 tons of carbon per person. But look at what they squeeze out of those 8 tons.
Right, nearly 85 years of life expectancy, near universal post-secondary education.
An incredibly low maternal mortality rate, extreme societal stability. They're highly efficient converters of carbon into human well-being.
It's like, imagine we have a whole grid of race cars burning fuel on a track, representing the wealthiest nations. Japan is still burning a lot of gas to stay at the front of the pack.
Right, they're burning a lot of fuel.
But their engine is tuned to absolute perfection. They're getting incredible mileage out of every single drop of fuel compared to the giant gas-guzzling engines being driven by some of the other rich nations.
That's a brilliant analogy.
And because the other wealthy drivers take such a massive, disproportionate penalty for their sloppy, inefficient emissions, Japan ends up looking much better by comparison.
They effectively pass them in the rankings simply by being less wasteful with their pollution.
But, you know, I have to push back on this ranking system a bit.
Go for it.
The Earth doesn't care about our human efficiency rankings.
No, it does not.
The atmosphere doesn't care if you squeezed a college degree and a long life out of a ton of CO2. It just cares about the absolute volume of greenhouse gases being trapped.
Absolute volume is all that matters to the climate.
Exactly. So jumping from 23rd to 14th might look great on a government report, but is being the cleanest of the heavy polluters really a win when the absolute emissions are still driving climate change?
It is a totally valid critique of the metric. From a purely ecological standpoint, no, being the cleanest heavy polluter is not a victory.
Right. It feels like a technicality.
The PHDI measures relative efficiency, but the biosphere operates on absolute limits. Being highly efficient is a necessary transition phase. I mean, it's certainly better than being inefficient.
Sure, less waste is better.
But it cannot be the end goal. The ultimate challenge for Japan, and indeed for the entire developed world, is achieving what we call absolute decoupling.
Absolute decoupling. What exactly does that entail?
That means breaking the link entirely between economic growth, human well-being, and environmental degradation.
So HDI goes up, but emissions don't just slow down, they actually drop to 0.
Exactly. The downward trend from 10.3 tons to 8.0 is promising, but to truly relieve the planetary pressure, that absolute number needs to approach 0. Efficiency will only buy us time. It won't solve the underlying math of planetary boundaries.
It's a sobering reality check. I mean, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, peeling back the layers of these spreadsheets from 1990 all the way to 2023.
We really went through the entire framework.
We did. We looked at the HDI, the IHDI, the GDI, the GII, and the PHDI. Based on everything we've unpacked, I want to synthesize the three massive takeaways from this deep dive for you listening at home.
3 core lessons.
Exactly. First, the benchmark. Despite the flat curve of their recent progress, we cannot deny that Japan remains an absolute global gold standard for baseline human development.
The foundational metrics are stellar.
They are. They have mastered the art of extending human life to an unprecedented 84.7 years, providing deep, meaningful education with nearly 13 mean years of schooling, and distributing those basic societal services equally across their population.
Surviving and learning are practically guaranteed by the state. The baseline is truly unassailable.
Right. The second takeaway, however, is the structural imbalance.
The paradox we started with.
Exactly. The ultimate paradox of Japan's prosperity is a gender divide that feels decades behind its actual economic status. Dropping 75 places on the gender index is a glaring warning light.
It's the anchor holding the ship back.
The lack of political participation, with women holding only 15.7% of parliament seats, and that massive 37% income gap, they act as heavy anchors on the entire society.
They represent a systemic failure to move from protective development to empowering development.
Exactly. And that ultimately holds back the true economic and social potential of the nation.
And what's the third takeaway?
The third takeaway is the planetary responsibility. Japan is highly efficient with its resources, managing to jump up 7 places in the eco rankings simply because their social engine is better tuned than their global peers.
The highly tuned race car.
Right. But their absolute material and carbon footprints are still a heady debt to the Earth. The recent carbon reductions over the last decade are a great start, but surviving the next century requires absolute decoupling.
We can't just get better mileage out of the same old fuels.
Exactly. We need a new engine entirely.
Ultimately, the data from this massive report reminds us that true human progress isn't just about adding years to a biological life or adding dollars to a national bank account.
There has to be more than that.
It is about ensuring that all demographics, regardless of gender or background, can share equitably in the power and prosperity of that society, and ensuring that we do so on a planet that remains habitable for the very generations we are working so hard to educate.
That is perfectly said. And, that brings me right back to that heavy brass scale we visualized at the very beginning. The proud 23 on one side, the sinking 98 on the other.
It's hard to unsee that image.
It is. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day.
A parting question.
Yeah. If a country like Japan has managed to conquer the deepest biological limits to become the longest living society on Earth, if they can essentially defeat mortality to such a stunning degree, what is the invisible cultural barrier preventing that same highly advanced society from simply paying women equally and closing the gender gap?
It's a profound contradiction.
Can a nation truly be considered fully developed if half its population is safely riding the train but systematically sidelined from driving it?
A question for every nation, really.
Exactly. Think about how your own society balances those scales. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the numbers that define our world.